Time for your weekly segment of garbage analysis and predictions. Welcome to Week 9 of Overwatch League 2022. I think it's safe to say that the midseason madness has lived up to its name so far. Things are crazy and they feel insanely unpredictable. Will the trend continue this week? Let's find out. As usual, we start things off in the APAC region when the Spark and the Fusion square off. Not gonna lie, I'm still not sure what to think of either roster. It's clear who had the better week, I don't think anybody's debating that, but something we have to think about is whether or not the Spark had a very easy week. Between beating the Charge and a struggling Dragons team, one might argue that it's a bad idea to be putting too much stock into their performance. I don't think there's any guarantee they get a win this week. However, back-to-back 3-0s is still something we have to acknowledge, as it proves that they're at least kind of legit, you know? On the other hand, we have the Philly Fusion, and none of us really liked how they played, let's call it how it is. Anytime anything went wrong, they were collapsing. Adversity and getting pushed back does not seem to mix well with this group. If they can't dominate, they just don't win. It's so weird. And until they can prove otherwise, I think you just have to go with the Spark in this situation. Philly always seem to be in disarray when things get hard for them, and I'm not a fan of that, especially when the Spark are putting up good performances. So yeah, I think you gotta go with the Spark here. There's not much of a debate. The Fusion did not look very good. Speaking of performances, how about we get into the Guangzhou Charge versus the Chengdu Hunters matchup, because oh man, the Charge are hitting some brutal low points here. Nothing seems to have changed compared to the kickoff clash. Meta changes have been absolutely nothing. Those same problems and indecisive tendencies are written all over their gameplay. Maybe you have like Choi making a heroic play from time to time, but there's no reliable playmaking from a general standpoint. The Chargers season has already spiraled out of control and there seems to be no end in sight. And they'll be going up against a Chengdu team who looked kind of improved compared to the previous weeks. Leave is absolutely cracked on Sojourn, and the Wrecking Ball double flex support pick definitely is making more of a difference than I initially thought. Maybe I still have some questions about Jinmu's flexibility in this kind of meta, but Chengdu generally just seem more competent. I mean, they beat Philly and almost Seoul. That's more than enough evidence to suggest that they're going to beat the Charge with relative ease. They're heading in two clearly different directions. Guangzhou stand little to no chance here as the Hunters continue to hit their stride. Starting off NA for the week, we have the London Spitfire versus the Paris Eternal. Just like the previous two games we discussed, this one is set to follow a similar trend. London are up, and Paris are down, down, down. The Spitfire are currently on a 4-game winning streak, making them one of the hottest teams in the Overwatch League. With how inconsistent the Eternal are, there's not much reason to trust in them to end this hot streak. They got their first win recently, which is cool and all, but London beat that same New York team without much of an issue. The two confidence levels are in very, very different places, so my pred just has to be a sweep in favor of London. The Eternals' experimentation with Doomfist, Ana, and Zen last week was largely a failure. They have yet to find that composition that makes the whole team happy, and that's a huge problem when considering the level of confidence London are currently playing with. The Battle of EU is not looking good. The Houston Outlaws versus the Atlanta Reign. Seeing as this is one of the only decent looking games in North America this week, at least from my point of view, let's pencil this in as a key match of the week. In theory, this could be a good game. It's reasonable to have confidence in either side when we have this kind of mirror match with Doomfist going on, but if we're being honest with ourselves, the Reign should be favored for sure. Aside from having the better overall season so far, I generally feel like their execution has been a lot cleaner. This especially was the case after that nightmare performance we saw with the Outlaws last week against the Gladiators. Not to sound like I'm coping here, but Houston genuinely could have won the first 2 maps of that series if they were a bit more mindful. If you have those types of mental lapses where you choke in those critical moments against top-notch competition, you're going to be less credible in the eyes of us fans. I don't make the rules around here, that's how it goes. When you waste golden opportunities to make a big splash, you're going down in the pecking order. So while the Outlaws aren't far behind in theory, what reason is there to not believe they won't choke again? It's kind of what they're known for at this point. Their play leaves a lot to be desired, and I mean especially recently we've seen it. Their overcommitment and weird support ultimate timings leave a very bad taste in your mouth. So I have the Atlanta Reign winning the series 3-1 just based on better execution and fundamentals alone. Their support line has been a bit more consistent in the new meta so far, and there's also a strong possibility that Kai is in for a big game, as the Outlaws DPS have been a bit up and down so far. The Reign are the safer, more reliable option. The Toronto Defiant versus the Los Angeles Gladiators. In spite of my early stage criticisms for this Toronto team, they're starting to show me some fight. To my surprise, they made some good adjustments last week. If Hisu and Muse can play up to that kind of standard over and over again, they're always going to be in a position to beat these rosters around or below their level. I wasn't expecting much from them, but they're starting to prove me wrong. So maybe it's time to put a bit more trust in this group. Is it enough trust to put them over the Glads? Oh, no, definitely not. The Glads are a bit much for them to handle in this kind of double flex support meta, so to speak. They're just a stronger, more dangerous roster, which is why you have to go with LA in like a 3-1 or a 3-0. I don't see this as a challenge that the Defiant are ready for when they haven't actually beaten a solid opponent this year yet, and it's hard to reasonably expect them to show consistency in general with how the season has gone so far. The Glads handle this for sure. The Seoul Dynasty versus the Guangzhou Charge. It's a different matchup for them, but the same basic principles apply. The Guangzhou Charge are essentially in a league of their own when it comes to the APAC pecking order. They're the only ones who don't seem to have any sort of competitive fire whatsoever. And if you don't have the drive to win and the confidence to succeed, you're not going to beat the best team in APAC. Sorry, I don't make the rules, folks. The Dynasty are definitely going to sweep without a question. They have the stronger synergy, the better flexibility, and way more playmaking. The Charge kind of get overwhelmed in this situation. How is anybody going to stop Fitz, or Smurf, or Prophet, and how about Stalker getting into the mix? What's the solution? In my eyes, there is none. The Charge are struggling at a pretty fundamental level. Not even the Choi and Krong comfort picks can save them right now. They're just a mess. Next, we have the LA Valiant versus the Chengdu Hunters, and this will also be a key match of the week. Decisions here, folks. I kind of like where both teams are heading. The Valiant and Hunters both had a solid opening week. LA's roster depth has been put on full display recently, and the signing of Marvel is looking to be a good one early on. And they're going up against a Chengdu team who, as mentioned previously, are starting to grow on me. I'm at a crossroads here. It's pretty tough to count either of these teams out since they're both dark horses that can make you pay pretty easily. I guess it comes down to what team you put more stock into after 1 week of gameplay. And if you ask me, that team is the Chengdu Hunters by a slight margin. I don't mean any disrespect to the Valiant. I really like where they're heading currently, but Chengdu just did a bit more to impress me during that first week. For starters, they beat Philly more convincingly than the Valiant did. It was a solid win for the Hunters, and the Valiant, in my opinion, were dead in the water for most of that series, but then Philly kind of just messed it up big time, and I believe a lot of the blame should be going towards them. But that's not all. Chengdu pushing arguably the best team in APAC to 5 maps gives you a lot of hope that this team is on the right track. The Valiant had a few lapses in the Guangzhou series as well, you know? Chengdu's delivery came off a bit stronger, maybe just a little more proven if you will. As a result, I'll be picking the Chengdu Hunters to win a tight 5-map series. I've got a good feeling about Leave. I think he's going to be the X factor that gives Chengdu the win this time. As much as I love the Valiant DPS, Leave's ceiling is significantly higher, and I just trust him more to take over a game based off of what we've seen in the past. Please do keep in mind, though, that this should be a really good game. The Valiant have a lot of options that they can run both at tank and DPS, and you can already see Molly making some early differences at flex support since joining the team. This Valiant roster has a serious edge to them all of a sudden, and if innovation goes off in the Tracer department, Chengdu definitely could get overwhelmed. Get ready for some fireworks, guys. I think this is going to be a great match. Closing out day 2 of APAC is Shanghai and Philly, and this will also be a key match of the week considering that this rivalry has been starting to brew recently. Here's how I see it. Neither team looked very good last week, as they both appear to be having trouble with their execution in this kind of meta. However, Philly were definitely more competitive last week, and they've had Shanghai's number so far this year. But of course, it's always hard to count out the Shanghai Dragons. I know that they aren't what they once were, but they still are the reigning champions with a whole bunch of talent. You never know when they might decide to suddenly wake up. But the fact of the matter is, the Dragons might be in trouble if they don't change their approach. If we get what we saw during Week 8, you know, like the true staple comp so far, I fear for the Dragons quite a bit. I don't love it when Lee Jae-gon has to watch from the bench, as I think his consistency helps keep the team together. But that's not all. The Dragons do not look happy running Doom, which is a huge issue since he's really popular right now. The dive synergy just wasn't there. Void and his teammates were not on the same page. The Fusion may have crumbled mentally in their losses recently, but at least they showed some competence in the new meta. The Dragons either need to show significant improvement in a short amount of time, or they need to change their approach quite a bit. They could try running Fate on ball some more, I guess, but even that may not be enough. It's clear what works best currently in the meta, and the Dragons may not have it, so I'm feeling comfortable going with the Fusion in a 4-mapper. They have had Shanghai's number this entire year, and the Dragons aren't in great shape right now, so I see all the reason in the world to believe that this trend of Fusion beating Shanghai somehow is going to continue. Anyway, moving back over to North America, we've got the San Francisco Shock and the Vancouver Titans game. Okay. So I like the direction Vancouver are going towards. They continued to show me signs of improvement last week, which is a great sign. Allowing for both of their flex supports to work in unison while embracing Doom and Sigma has netted some positive results for them. They're a lot more interesting to watch, and I'm beginning to think that an upset could happen any day. Unfortunately for them, Saturday will not be that day. There's no world where you can pick them to defeat the San Francisco Shock. They're one of the strongest teams in this current meta. Violet Finn puts Skyrippa Aztec to shame, and in a general sense, I guess you could say, their playmaking is a lot stronger. The Shock are definitely sweeping here. The Titans are someone you have to keep a closer eye on now for sure, but the Shock are OP, man. The outcome is not in question. If you're the Titans, it's more so about just continuing to build that momentum rather than going for the big upset. Take away some lessons from this and become stronger from it. Next we have the LA Gladiators and the Washington Justice. There's a few marquee matchups to look forward to that makes this game somewhat interesting, I'd say. Kevster versus Decay, I think that's always a fun thing to watch, but you've also got to think about the roster news if you're the Washington Justice. Their rookie flex support, Vigilante, is finally league eligible. Seeing as he was one of the bigger name support players coming out of contenders this year, this is a big deal for Washington. Their support line has shown some ups and downs this year, and Vigilante just might be the answer they were looking for. Maybe him and Krillin can do some major damage. The Justice could be pretty exciting to watch this weekend. In the end, though, they are playing a Gladiators team that looks pretty superior on paper. They have the better playmakers for starters. I mean, there's a lot more superstar potential, and I especially hold that edge at tank, as Washington don't seem to totally have a grip on who they want to play all of a sudden. That's a real bummer too, because I literally was just complimenting them on their tank abilities the week before. But oh well. Then you also have to think about the support duel. Vigilante may be joining the fray, but Shu and Skewed is one of the deadliest support lines in the entire league. I don't know how I feel about a couple of rookies and Krillin taking them on. And just to add on one other thing, LA are way more consistent, so I think you gotta favor the Glads in a 3-1. Washington literally feel the same as they did last year. One week they're up, the next they're nowhere to be seen. Every single meta change has drastic effects on what this roster is capable of. It's just not sustainable, especially when they're playing one of the best teams in the league. Concluding Saturday is the Defiant and Eternal matchup. Honestly, there's a good chance that this game goes the exact way as their previous meeting during the kickoff clash. Toronto may not be anything special, but they sure as hell can beat whatever Paris have shown so far. 8 map wins in 9 games is not it, Chief. Generally speaking, my thoughts on Paris versus London kind of carry over into this match. I'm not sure if it's a coaching thing or a combination of a couple of different things, but Paris don't look right. There may be a lot of doubt surrounding Toronto, but it's tough to envision them dropping a game like this. If Hisu and Muse keep on making the plays that they have, they're going to win this game for sure. So I'm going to take Toronto in a 3-0. All Toronto have to do is make appropriate composition choices based on map type like we've seen, and Paris won't stand much of a chance. This should be a relatively easy dub if they keep doing what they have been. Now for your Sunday games, and first is the Spark and Dynasty, which is absolutely another key match of the week. These two currently feel like the top 2 teams in their region, so it's exciting to see them clash again. It'll in all likelihood end up being the first real challenge for either team this stage, and I could not be more excited to watch it go down. Both teams showed some incredible flexibility last week, with many of their players appearing to be in their comfort zones. The outcome of this match could really come down to the circumstances. What compositions do we see the most? That is the big question here. The Spark seem to prefer the Sigma, while Seoul's choice often feels map-specific. The Dynasty have maybe shown a little more flexibility, which is a nice advantage for them, but it may not mean anything if they play the Sparks game. The more Sigma we see, the better it's going to be for Hangzhou. The more Doomfist and Winston dive-centric comps we get, the better it is for Seoul. What maps we get might decide this entire contest. My team of choice in this matchup, though, will be the Seoul Dynasty in a 5-map effort. I got to see firsthand how Seoul could adjust and make different choices on the fly when they got pushed thanks to that Chengdu series. It was pretty impressive with how they were able to pivot so much. With the Spark, though, I'm not entirely sure. They won their matches with relative ease last week. They played two struggling opponents who just couldn't challenge them at all. They could get away with literally doing anything they wanted to. Seoul have checked off the adversity box, but Hangzhou have not. Don't get me wrong, the Spark absolutely have the talent to win this game. Their DPS match up wonderfully with that of Seoul's, and the support line could honestly be a huge difference maker that outplays Seoul's. It really depends. It's that response factor that just hasn't been there for me, and it turns me off. It should be a really good game, but Seoul are the more flexible and, in my opinion, reliable choice. Concluding APAC is the Valiant versus the Dragons. Man, oh man, I do not know what to think here. Shanghai were so terrible last week. You really can't rule out a loss to the Valiant here at all. It just doesn't feel right to say deep down, but I think you have to weigh the option, right? The Dragons do not look very good on Doom comps, and there's been a lot of criticism lately about their play. I'd argue they're not in a very good headspace. They're not used to losing like this, and the Valiant, like we were talking about before, are gaining steam at a pretty quick rate. Maybe the 2-season championship window curse is a real thing. Perhaps the Dragons are no longer destined for greatness. With how their season has gone so far, it's reasonable to have doubts. But for me, I'm not going to give up on them so soon. Maybe it's foolish to think this way, but I'd like to believe that they have a bounce-back week, whether it be against one of their opponents or both of them. The Dragons are way too talented. I refuse to believe that their time is up so soon. In my heart, they are still the better team. They just have to wake up, forehead. This team is bound to make adjustments as they always do. Unless they truly are done for, they're not going to look the same as last week. And when that happens, I don't think the Valiant are going to be prepared. My prediction is that they play a little more Fate and Lee Jae-gon, then Lip has a fantastic day as the Dragons stop the bleeding and beat the Valiant in 5 maps. Now, I don't have any evidence to back this up. This is literally a source, just trust me bro kind of moment. This is pure copium and gut feelings. Reasonably, I think the Valiant look like the better team right now, but the Dragons are so talented, man. I can't give up on them. I refuse to believe this is their destiny this year. The Valiant aren't a perfect team. There are holes that you can't expose, and I think the Dragons have what it takes to kind of capitalize on that, if you will. That's enough about my psychotic beliefs, though. Let's get into the Justice versus Spitfire match, alright? What a curious case this is. In my opinion, the Spitfire are overdue for a loss at this point. They've been winning a lot lately, but on the other hand, they are definitely, I mean, it's pretty obvious, they're way more consistent than the Washington Justice are. I really want to be different here and pick the Justice, but I just can't get myself to commit. The Justice should look better this week if they follow their traditional trend, but I don't know if it's enough. I'm not all that confident in them since they're still so indecisive as a team, and I don't just mean in the gameplay sense. This idea of suddenly playing more Kalios and a lot less Mag instead of having balance really bothers me. Look at them in comparison to London. Now those guys know what they're doing right now. The game plan is set in stone. Hottie plays the Rhine and they go rush. Poco plays the Sig, and they'll play some snipers and Tracer and everything. London have a better system, they have more confidence, and the better track record, so I will gladly take the Spitfire in a 3-2 series. Again, part of me thinks the Justice will randomly be good again, which is why I think the score will be close. But ultimately, the Spitfire have the better system, and the meta works just as good for them. Sparker and Shax can both run rampant in this kind of meta, and landing on BAP or Zen should be enough to keep pace with the Justice support line unless I am heavily underestimating the value of Vigilante here. I feel pretty comfortable picking London here though, so how about we discuss Dallas versus the NYXL? The Dallas Fuel are looking to continue their rebound, while the NYXL are just hoping for some positivity in general. We'd all love for a good game here, but none of us are expecting to get one. The NYXL have been a mess all season long. I mean, despite having access to double flex support compositions now and Yaki on his comfort picks, this New York team is very lost. The execution situation is rough to say the least, and they just don't look good in this kind of meta for whatever the reason. I think their surprise Orisa pick against the Spitfire speaks for itself. They're getting desperate, and that's the last thing you want to be against the Dallas Fuel, right? Especially when they seem to have found some new life with Fearless in the lineup. I'd be pretty surprised if this isn't a 3-0 stomp in favor of the Fuel. This idea of confidence and meta understanding is a big theme this year, and I fully expect this match to be a prime example of it. And now, to finish up the week, we have the Boston Uprising versus the Florida Mayhem. Boston had a surprisingly strong match against the Paris Eternal. Not that it was weird to see them win, it was just more how they did it, right? They crushed it. The efforts of crimzo were unreal during the series, and Boston showed some real confidence. The question is, are they worth trusting now? In general, they haven't looked half bad when it comes to their performances in the midseason madness. If they can beat who they should and push a team like Atlanta the distance, maybe they could give Florida a challenge here. But in general, the Mayhem are still going to be the favored team here, as they've remained more competitive this stage overall, and they match up pretty well with Boston. Aside from some concerns that could come in a potential Sigma duel, Florida holds their own or is better in a majority of places. And now that Exy is starting to look more like his old self, I especially think that Florida can make the more impactful plays at the damage roll. Exy, Hydron, and Checkmate is a bit much for Boston to handle. The hits gain department in particular might be one-sided. My prediction will be a 3-1 victory for the Florida Mayhem. This Florida team has been more likable so far, and I think it'll take either a ridiculous strategy and or for crimzo and the DPS to have another dominant performance, and seeing how their season has gone so far, that just doesn't seem likely. Boston are starting to get there, but I'm not quite ready to commit to them full time. If they were to get a win against Florida here, maybe I start to change my mind, but until proven otherwise, that's kind of my thought process with them. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for the weekly preview and predictions. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to this channel if you're new, and leave a comment with your own predictions down below. I'd love to hear what you think. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.